in ensuring human rights? That could be a seminar for one author. My background is that before I entered the parliament in 2019, I was an academic researcher for 15 years, and my themes were in youth research, migration, racism, and the latest research was on these unaccompanied minors that came to Finland in 2015 without parents. And so, as a politician, I try to combine the role of a researcher, an activist, and politician. And I have also that long background in the feminist activism in Finland. And in the Finnish context, the worst you can be as a woman politician is that you are anti-racist and feminist, and you are not afraid of speaking. So I get a lot of hate speech. And I'm always an example of a politician that gets attacked really hard. And my theme my motto in research was from hidden to be seen. And I have followed this motto also in politics. This means that I want to raise questions that are hidden in the public discourse, that people are not aware of. Human rights violations, for example, in the Finnish society, and especially linked to what the asylum seekers are facing in the Finnish society. What is the leftist approach to human rights? And I have a few points. I would say that we do not approach human rights only from an individual's perspective, but from a collective perspective. That means that we are aware of the structures that violate individuals in a society. And this means that human rights are not something that are taken care of individual by individual, case by case, but that we have to fix the structures in the society that violates humans and human rights and be aware of this violation. And this means that we have to focus on social issues and economical issues as human rights issues. This means that, for example, when we look at the income level, this is a question of human rights. The access to healthcare is a question of human rights. The access to housing is a question of human rights. And all these questions mainly are taken care of at the structural level of the society. And if I compare myself as a leftist politician to the right-wing politicians who are focused on human rights, the right-wing politicians, they want to fix one case by one case, individual by individual, but they don't want to change the austerity structures that cause human rights problems, for example, in the Nordic societies. This was the first point. The second, leftist approach to human rights means that we avoid Western and colonial perspective on human rights. This means that we have to fight against this kind of discourse that says that human rights is something that is Western or Western-owned, and that we take these human rights to the other parts of the world. This means also that we have to focus on human rights problems that we, for example, have in Nordic countries that often represent themselves as the example of the Western world and how human rights are taken care of. We have a huge problem, for example, in Finland with women facing domestic violence. It's a shame in the European context. We are at the top level. This was the second point. And the third point is that the left has to be aware of how the far right and the right-wing politicians are misusing the human rights discourse at the moment. This concerns also the public discussion and the media. In 2015 and 16, when Finland received a big amount of refugees, I was then a researcher and I was following the Finnish media, how they represented refugees and asylum seekers. And the main result was that they were representing these asylum seekers as a threat to the Finnish society, but also as a threat to the Finnish women. And the refugees and asylum seekers were very strongly sexualized, and racialized. And now, when I'm in the parliament, I listen to the speeches of the far right and right, how they're talking all the time about asylum seekers as a threat to the Finnish society, as a threat to the gender equality. They talk about gender equality, how important it is, and I have responded to them that you are only interested in gender equality when it's about boosting your own racist agenda. So researchers call this kind of racist discourse as Femонаціоналізм. So that you use the gender equality discourse in your racist discourse, but actually you are not at all interested in progressing women's rights. So this is a very big demand for us as left politicians. We have to be aware of this racist discourse, but we also have to have tools to fight this far-right discourse. What we can do is that we defend human rights from below. This means that we give voice to the people who are facing human rights problems. Because very often, for example, when we have a feminist seminar on human rights violation, it's the white Western women who come and tell what should be done and what the problems are. No, we have to change that perspective. We have to be aware of how strongly the human rights are questioned openly at the moment. I can tell an example from Finland. We have a border with Russia for 1,300 kilometers. The right-wing opposition and the far right are misusing this horrible context of the Russian invasion in order to cause fear in the Finnish population. And they constantly use this kind of example of what happens if Russians will force huge amount of migrants across the border to Finland. And the right wing and the far right say that that's why we have to close the border totally, that's why we have to give up the human rights agreements that we have, that's why we have to take away the right to seek asylum. And this is also a very difficult place for the lefty politicians. For now, we have chosen to be silent and not to say anything. And in the parliament, actually, we are only 5 to 6 members of parliament who actively and openly speak for the rights to seek asylum. So the left has to choose when is it silence and when is it confronting the far right. And it's not an easy task. And then to the next point, I think Sören also lifted up this question that as a leftist human rights defenders, we fight defend human rights wherever. We always defend human rights on all the persons wherever they come from, and we agree that human rights are universal. So we don't use this kind of selective solidarity and double standards. And then I come to my last point, which combines the first point and underlines the fact that leftist human rights wants to change the structures of the society. And when I think about the situation of Ukraine, this means that we have to build a Ukraine and help to rebuild a Ukraine that has a very strong public sector and has a strong democracy, because that's the best way also to defend individual people. You maybe know something about the context and history of Finland, that we built a welfare state in very, very poor conditions after the Second World War. And I would say that those politicians were really brave. They decided that even if we didn't have money enough, we invested huge amount to the education of all children, for example, and the healthcare sector, the public sector. And now the welfare state model is something that people from all around the world come and admire. And the welfare state has also guaranteed gender equality. That means we often say that the welfare state actually is the best friend of a Nordic woman. But that means that you invest hard on childcare, on parental leave, and that you take care of that. The care is also divided by fathers and mothers. Okay, I don't want to impose any ideas, but this was some ideas of how maybe the reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukrainian society could happen. And I am very eager to help to share ideas, and I'm really happy for this seminar, and it has given me so much. I just said to someone that I'm full packed with information, and it will take at least 1 week to analyze everything. I'm so happy, and also for your very warm welcome. It has been amazing.